Hello, folks. It's Derek, joined today by returning champion Julia Gledhill. I'm very pleased to welcome her back to the program. Julie is a research analyst for the National Security Reform Program at the Stimson Center. She focuses on Pentagon spending, military contracting, and weapons acquisition. And what a coincidence, because I would like to talk about a little weapons acquiring today. She's also the co-host of the Undiplomatic podcast with friend of the show, Van Jackson. She's got a column at Forbes magazine, and she is co-authoring a chapter for a book that will be coming out soon called "A World for All: New Visions of U.S. Foreign Policy," edited by another friend of the show, Matt Duss. So, Julia, all that said, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Great to be here.
So let's just talk about the battleship. This is what I want to talk about mainly. There's other stuff to talk about here in in military spending land, but the CBO just released a report on the Trump class battleship, which I have no idea when we're going to even see one of these roll off the line. But apparently, the first one's going to cost $23 billion. Can you walk us through that price tag, and maybe then we'll get into the actual advisability of building a battleship in the year 20 by God 26. But let's start with just why is it costing so much?
Sure. I mean, to answer your first question, if I were to speculate, I would say that this is never going to see the light of day, and I'm not the only one who feels that way.
No, come on now. That's
Um,
another question. I do want to talk about that, but let's assume for comedic purposes, if nothing else, that this is actually gonna happen.
Sure. So $23 billion a pop, that's 275 billion through 2056 for 15 planned ships. Why are they so expensive? These would be the largest surface combatant in the world, as well as the most heavily armed combatant ever built by the Navy, because it is equipped with anti-air, land attack, anti-ship missiles, hypersonic missiles, nuclear cruise missiles, large lasers, a railgun. The list is
As one
exhaustive.
does. Yeah.
Yes, and a major reason beyond just the sheer firepower that this would be $23 billion, and let's call that a minimum, a conservative estimate of what this battleship would cost. All of those things require an extraordinary amount of electricity, it turns out.
Go figure. Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. I mean any number that comes out years before anything actually goes into production is almost certainly low by maybe orders of magnitude. So by the time this ship is actually built, it could cost quite a bit more than $23 billion if it is ever built, as you say. Um, of the massive number of armaments you just listed off, how many of them are still in the somewhat experimental phase? Like the rail gun costs a lot of money. Has anybody ever actually proven that it works? Or the laser system, which I gather is mainly meant for air defense. Again, we'll get into the stupidity of building this ship in a second. But how much of this stuff is actually proven versus something that's going to wind up not working after we pay a lot of money for it?
Yeah, this is a great question. I would say the minority of those capabilities are proven, reliable, and cost effective. And this is another reason beyond just like the fact that they're high power capabilities and would require the ship to be nuclear powered. The nuclear propulsion piece is a big reason why it's so expensive, but also just the idea that all these capabilities are going to be developed as the ship is as well. You have a high risk of concurrency when you are building before the design is complete, including the design of a lot of these systems. This is kind of the original sin of a lot of Pentagon boondoggles, and particularly in the Navy. We have a few examples, including the Zumwalt destroyer, the Littoral combat ship, the Constellation class frigate, of ships that we concurrently developed and as a result spent far too much money on.
I think it might be worth digging into a few of those cases and why those projects failed and how much of it was due to the technology not kind of meshing up to the promise that was laid out when they were designed. versus getting a certain way down the line in a particular ship class or a particular project, and realizing that like we don't need this, or it's not going to do what we need it to do, or something, it's time to cut bait, because this, even if all of these things worked, who needs a battleship in 2026? And like, not only does do you struggle to think of a reason why this thing should exist, you struggle to think of an outcome other than deploying one of these things and having it immediately riddled with drones and anti-ship missiles, uh, and having to spend all of its time defending itself, which is, I gather, what the Pentagon does a lot lately, given what happened to its bases in the Middle East during the Iran War, but isn't really maybe the best use of $23 billion a pop.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think so. I want to get to the specifics of why the Zumwalt and the Constellation class frigates failed, but to answer your question, I mean, the fiscal year 2027 shipbuilding budget request from the White House is $66 billion dollars for 34 ships, most of which, 18 of which are battleships. That's a near 50% jump from fiscal year 2026, and the biggest Navy shipbuilding request since 1962 in real terms, accounting for inflation. Why do we need these battleships? I mean, the only reason is like force projection, right? I mean, we can talk about some of our other Navy boondoggles in recent past, the Ford and
Which was
Lincoln,
the
but
same
like,
reason we needed all the bases in the Middle East. So let's
yeah,
in the Persian Gulf.
I mean,
So
there's
let's
there's no
let's yeah.
reason. There's no reason except for doing more, right? And then meanwhile, we have our sailors who are, undernourished and lacking hygiene products. So I mean, it's a huge problem. The battleships, the aircraft carriers, like these are obviously used for force projection. But to go back to the case of the Zumwalt or the Littoral combat ship, I mean these were ships that were overly technologically complex and ended up resulting in incredible schedule delays and cost overruns, in part because the Navy tried to integrate all these fancy schmancy weapons. And as a result, not only did they get fewer ships, but they got ships that are unreliable, and that they produced in far fewer numbers than originally planned. I mean, the littoral combat ship, the Navy tried to mothball it like within years of its completion, and are still trying to find a mission for that program. So we shouldn't be retroactively trying to figure out what we're supposed to be doing with these multi-billion-dollar boondoggles.
The littoral combat ship. I mean, we could do a whole thing about it. We could do a whole episode about that. Like the fact that they had to stick with two different designs because politically they couldn't get rid of either one of them. The idea, the most recent proposal was, we could send the LCS into the Strait of Hormuz to clear mines, which I think Spencer Ackerman, we had him on, and he said, yeah, they would have to do it like one mine at a time, because the first mine that ship hits is going to be curtains. Like it's just so ridiculous that you're still trying to find justifications, and they don't make any sense. So yeah, the
Yeah.
LCS is such a wonderful case, I think.
Exactly. And then, another one, I mean, the Zoom wall, it was supposed to be intended for shore bombardment, right? Which is something that's traditionally done by battleships. And, the Navy included this like crazy design, which included this sort of experimental naval gun. And that's how they went from a planned 32 Zoom wall destroyers to three. And the cost overruns were like 86%. And so those ships ended up being like some $13 billion a piece.
Is there any? I mean, you've probably looked at the battleship uh, design more closely, I'm sure, than I have. Is there any allowance for the fact that this kind of thing is becoming obsolete? Like we've seen most recently the Navy having to park the Abraham Lincoln way out in the middle of the sea to keep away from drones and anti-ship missiles, to the point where it couldn't be resupplied easily. Its effectiveness you can question. We're still not at the point where uh, Iran has been degraded. Obviously, that war is still going on effectively. Um, what you're talking about a battleship which can't even project force as far as an aircraft carrier, as far out as an aircraft carrier can with its aircraft component. So you're going to have to bring those things to be effective in closer to shore where they would be vulnerable to drones and missiles. Like, is there any allowance for this? Like, what is the plan for using one of these things when the first drone swarm shows up?
I wish I knew. I don't have an answer for you. I think that probably the answer from a battleship defender would be, oh, well, we're doing deterrence because we can carry nuclear armed sea launched cruise missiles on this ship. The Slickaman program. So, and they can carry a bunch of conventional missiles as well. So deterrence will save us from
Deterrence,
that.
yeah, always deterrence. Always the a good idea. So as you said, and I agree with you, it's unlikely that any of these things is actually going to see the light of day. But how much money could we realistically guess is going to be spent to get to the point where we decide that none of these things see the light of day? And bearing in mind that this is Donald Trump's baby, it's being named after him, so he's not going to cancel it. That's at least 2 more years. Um, Ballpark this, like how much money could be wasted even if there's no ship that ever comes from it?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, the NDAA, as written, has $1 billion put away for the Trump class battleship in advanced procurement. So, kind of allowing this is sort of how the Pentagon gets the ball rolling on programs that aren't officially greenlit yet. Advanced procurement essentially means that you can start to like build components for things that have a long lead time. And so, I mean, conservatively, like, I mean, a billion. And, you know, there has been like some
At
pushback
least,
from
yeah.
members of Congress, but I think that we are going to be in the hole by quite a bit.
I mean, that's the dynamic, I guess, that maybe is worth talking about as well. There's been pushback from members of Congress, but ultimately, they're going to be swayed by. I mean, the bulk of Congress, I would assume, is going to be swayed by we don't want to take on Trump. If you're a Republican, that's still a death knell, pretty much.
Hmm.
And B, you're going to have all the lobbying and all the like, these are going to create, it's going to create American jobs, and we're going to be producing these things at home. And don't you want the jobs and all these, all the money that you'd be taking out of your state or your district? Like, that's going to be the thing that I would assume would sway enough of Congress to keep this in the NDAA and keep it going for at least a little while.
Yeah, I mean, I think that that's a pretty safe bet. Members of Congress lack both the political will, the gumption, and the imagination to offer anything else that's useful and immediately helpful, I think, to the material reality of their constituents. And I mean, we've seen that for decades. It's just very, very ingrained, obviously, to keep these things going. And regardless of who's president, those incentives remain very powerful.
To be fair, I mean, like, everything in the US is so good right now. Like, how could you find another thing to spend money on
Right.
in the paradise that we're living in, where I think, Gary, Indiana's been without power for 2 weeks after a storm, and nothing. Everything's great. Everything's perfect here. So let's talk about the other thing that Trump wants to do here, and this was from the Washington Post uh, about a week ago. He wants to, and to be clear, like, the battleship is his thing. He remembers battleships from World War II, and he likes the battleship, and he wants there to be battleships. That's really why this is happening. Like, the
Mhm.
Navy didn't even necessarily ask for this, and maybe that's another thing we could talk about. But let's add in here the other bit of nostalgia. And I can't tell if it's nostalgia for like the last time the US military clearly won a war, or the last time Trump's brain was still working, but he wants the aircraft carriers to look the way they used to. So he wants the island moved on the Ford class aircraft carriers from the rear of the ship to the middle, which is going to probably cost to redesign ships. And I assume you wouldn't do it to the ones that have already been produced, but like the ones that are still coming off the line slowly but surely,
Mhm.
it's going to cost billions of dollars, I would assume, to make this change to no discernible effect other than the aesthetic. Um, what have you what have you heard about this other boondoggle here that he's after?
Yeah, so as you say, this is quite nostalgic. Trump has pushed for a redesign of this aircraft carrier since his first term when they initially scoped it and found that it would indeed cost billions of dollars and further delay delivery of the next Ford class aircraft carrier, which I believe is like already 5 years late, if I remember correctly. And yeah, I mean, I think the best explanation is, yeah, it would look a lot like the Essex class aircraft carriers that were, bumbling around when he was a little kid. And yeah, so the multi-story tower, the island where, the command center for the ship, he wants it in the middle. I don't know. It's more symmetrical, I guess, but you have, less landing ground, less runway for aircraft to take off and land, which is the entire point of aircraft carriers. And then also, the administration and Trump individually is obsessed with getting rid of the carrier's electromagnetic aircraft launch or email system, and replacing it with steam power, which
Yeah,
is quite
I mean,
vintage.
reliable steam power. It's been around forever. Um,
um,
I do want to ask separately about that because he's not is he entirely off base here, or have there not been problems with the electromagnetic catapult system? Like, I'm not trying to give Donald Trump any credit for knowing what he's talking about here, but it seems to me that this is another one of these systems that was sort of concurrently designed along with the ship that is not necessarily working out. But tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, I've seen competing accounts. I've definitely seen that there have been problems that have come up with the email system. But as you say, I think steam power is probably relatively less reliable. And honestly, I think at this point, I mean, I've said publicly, I don't think that we should fund any more aircraft carriers for the reasons we established at the beginning of this conversation. And so I wouldn't say that I'm terribly interested in making it easier for us to launch aircraft off of our aircraft carriers to strike, for example, the people of Iran, which of course the Ford class carrier has been directly involved in. I mean, they went from Venezuela to Iran in one of the longest deployments in naval history, I think, since like the Vietnam War. So yeah, I mean, the specifics engineering wise of the email system, I'm sure that there are some problems that have come up, but relatively speaking, I can't say I'm terribly interested in making it better.
I think they should look for an even more primitive, like a whale oil or something. Can we do a whale oil catapult? Even more reliable. Um, so there's two questions I have here, sort of bigger picture in terms of both of these stories. One is, we are currently in a state where, as far as I understand it, the U.S. shipbuilding industry cannot even fulfill what the Navy wants of it now, let alone adding some complicated and pointless redesign of the aircraft carriers, let alone adding this entirely new massive ship class. So, what is the plan here? Is it just to sort of dangle money and hope that somebody comes along and says we'll build more ships, or like, what logistically it seems like this is, you're already in a difficult situation here in terms of delays and cost overruns, etc.
Yeah, I mean, last year, the Government Accountability Office, the original Doge, if you will, testified to Congress. They said, listen, the Navy's budget has nearly doubled this century. Our fleet size is smaller. Shipbuilding delivery delays continue and, continue to grow, as do cost overruns. And as you say, I mean, the reasons are we don't have the workforce and we don't have the industrial capacity. And so, really, the only way to ameliorate this type of strain and do anything efficiently is to just do way less, right? Not build battleships and maybe be more judicious about what it is the military needs at minimum, to do, for example, territorial defense. Yeah, I mean, I don't think that there's really any recognition of those constraints. The shipbuilding plans are so unrelated and just out of the depth of our shipbuilding capacity. I mean, the Navy plans to build 10 Ford class aircraft carriers over the next 40 years at $22 billion each. Um, and you have to think about the human impacts here, right? Like, we've established that the Navy shipbuilding budget has, nearly doubled in the past 2 decades. Meanwhile, the Gerald Ford class aircraft carrier sewage system barely works. In March, the ship's laundry facilities caught fire and burned for over 30 hours, putting over 600 people on board out of their beds, sleeping on floors and tables. It is just absolutely ridiculous. And, the Navy, Congress, the White House, like, we need a real reality check on what it is we actually can do and what the consequences are of so outlandishly exceeding our ability to build with our shipbuilding plans. I mean, people are suffering as a result.
And the second overarching question, what does it say to you that there's apparently nobody in the Navy who either can or is willing to uh, take these requests from the president or these orders, build me a battleship, make the aircraft carriers look pretty again, and say, we that's a really bad idea. Like, we shouldn't be doing that. Like, there doesn't seem to be any pushback. And I think that's partly a function of the dynamics of the Trump administration, and the fact that the senior officer ranks are now filled with people who don't want to piss him off, and who have gotten there because they didn't piss him off. But it doesn't say very much positively about the relationship, I think, between uh, the service branches and the civilian government, if you're not prepared to even step in with something as absurd as this.
I completely agree. I think that there's a severe lack of leadership, conviction, honesty, um, solidarity with the service members who are subjected to living on these carriers while we're waging wars of choice. I mean, it's honestly, it's devastating. It's very tragic. Beyond, the Ford sewage systems, the laundry facilities catching fire. We've seen news about the USS Lincoln. These people, like, the USS Lincoln was relieved of its duties, I think, 4 days ago, and is going home. But those people have been at sea for over 9 months. And not only that, but there's inconsistent communication with their families. They're maybe getting a call or two in a month, every 2 months. Food shortages. I mean, it's just insane to think about how much money we have spent on shipbuilding for not only these ships to fall apart, but for these people to suffer as a result, even as the Pentagon asked for more and more. And the Secretary Hegseth, I mean, when that reporting started to trickle out in April, I want to say, he called it fake news. Of
Of
course.
course, of course he did. Um, so let's pull back the lens a little bit with the time we have left. You've talked about what's allocated for the battleship program in the 2027 NDAA. Where does that stand? What is it? What's the number right now? The top line number, and the overall budget, because there's also this supplemental funding, massive supplemental funding that they're after as well in Congress. Correct?
Yes. Yeah. So the White House requested the infamous $1.5 trillion military budget. But the House and Senate versions of the National Defense Authorization Act, the annual defense policy bill that, set the policy, don't provide budget authority, but sort of set the top line for the budget. They largely tracked the White House budget request for $1.15 trillion in base funding. And the reason for that, as you say, is because the White House wanted to sort of fill out its $1.5 trillion budget with $350 billion in reconciliation funds. That's actually not even accounting for the the Iran war supplemental, which the Pentagon teased months later. But where we stand, the House passed its version of the bill. The Senate has yet to do so. They are on recess until mid September. A lot of Senate Democrats prior to August recess were putting up a fight and saying that they were not going to pass this budget over the Iran war. I am skeptical of that claim. I think they're kind of waiting for it to be politically fine for them to do whatever they please. I don't trust Schumer literally at all. And so we are sort of in wait and see mode as to whether, number one, the Senate even manages to pass its own version of the defense policy bill. Often, what we've seen in the past is that leadership will go to conference on the committee version of the bill and a House passed version of the bill, which basically means that the power brokers in the House and Senate get to make pretty substantial policy decisions without even floor debate. And then later on, Congress may take up some kind of supplemental or reconciliation bill in order to fill out that $1.5 trillion budget request, but remains to be seen.
What is your sense of the politics of something like this? If you can start talking about a $1.5 trillion military budget, with all the spending rolled up, and that's purely defense. I mean, that's not even factoring in like intelligence community, other aspects that really belong in the defense budget pool, but just the Pentagon budget. Um, it feels like a pretty easy political case to make for Democrats, especially, to oppose this on the grounds that it's just absurdly high, and
Mhm.
yet there is a perennial intense white knuckling fear on the part of most senior Democratic politicians that they will be labeled as soft on whatever, weak, trying to uh, make us vulnerable to our enemies, all this stuff that comes out of like the 1980s that they still haven't gotten over.
Yeah.
But what is your sense of like the the political opportunity here? Because I really feel like that message doesn't necessarily wash with the American public anymore. Like they're looking at the war in Iran, they're looking at 2 decades of 25 years at this point of failed, one failure after another. And maybe it's not as salient to say, if you're not willing to give these people $1.5 trillion to steer the car off the road into a ditch, that you're somehow betraying the country. Maybe that doesn't work as well as it used to.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I think that Democratic leadership in particular are actually they're so out of touch with the democratic base, and they actually don't really have a constituency. They have a lot of corporate money, and that's kind of it, right? Like the majority of Democrats in particular oppose the Iran war, are skeptical of Pentagon budget increases, are obviously struggling to live, to buy groceries, to house themselves, to pursue higher education, to do all of these things. And so yeah, I mean, I think that like the Democratic establishment is incredibly scared of these sort of this burgeoning sort of more progressive wing of the party, and that's a big part of why they're saying go get your own, when in fact they are the ones who are out of step with the majority of the Democratic base. I mean, this is analogous to any other sort of policy issue. I mean, I think like you know the young people's increasing skepticism of Israel, of military aid to Israel. I mean, this is like a more outlandish position from the Democratic establishment um, than, for example, being like pro life. Like if you were pro life, like that would be really out of step with your constituency. And yet we talk about it in such a different way because of the propagandizing that has happened for decades and decades in this country around what it means to be strong and about the US role in the world writ large.
So I think we'll leave it there for this episode. But I think we would obviously love to have you back to do a bigger discussion of the military budget and priorities and what that might look like. But Julia, thank you so much. I hope they name the first battleship after you or after Stimson or somebody, something. I mean, something nice. to commemorate the discussion that we've had. Um, of course, it'll be the Donald Trump, the USS Donald Trump. Oh my
Exactly.
god! Oh my god! I just had that was I shouldn't have done that to myself. I'm going to be thinking about that for days now. All right. Thank you so much, Julie. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Derek. Pleasure to be here.